Welcome back to Neil Ratner Rock Doc's Reading Room, where I'm serializing my book, Rock Doc. So we're getting close to the end of my first time in the music business. I'm getting ready to make a career change, but I got a couple more stories left, so let's see where we go today. Okay, need my glasses, of course, because we're all getting older and I need them to see. All right. So by 1974, the rock and roll lifestyle had started to take its toll. I was in London when I was stricken with the worst pain I had ever experienced. Second time. A friend drove me to Harley Street Clinic. The diagnosis, kidney stones. The doctor admitted me for a few days. Now, if you remember, I had had an earlier bout of kidney stones when I had been invited to be one of the voices on the Dark Side of the Moon album. And that ended with basically an emergency room visit. I never passed the stones. And when you don't pass the stones, basically you just change your diet, make sure you don't get dehydrated, and you hope they don't come back again. So, but they did. And this time they came back with a vengeance, and I had to be admitted. All right. So I'm in the hospital now, right? And it was late one night when an American film called Not as a Stranger came on TV. The story followed a group of medical students on their journey to become successful physicians. As I watched, it seemed as if Dr. Ahrens, the head surgeon, was talking directly to me when he was lecturing the interns. I can see the picture you have of yourself already. A country road in an old Ford. It's a white house. And you are St. George, complete in spotless armor. You get to the farmhouse. There's this man bleeding to death. Now, alone, without instruments, without assistance, you perform an impossible operation. And because your heart is pure, you save him. The desire to become a doctor was suddenly reignited in me. It had been buried somewhere deep inside, but had never gone away. I don't know if it was the kidney stones, the pain meds, the movie, or what, but I began to cry. And I continued for a long time. The music business was hard, and I constantly had to play the tough guy when really I was a softie inside. I was proud of what I had accomplished, but I was looking for something different both emotionally and intellectually, and I wanted to make more of a personal difference in other people's lives. I decided then and there to go back to school to become a physician, and once I got out of the hospital, I put my plan into action. Jim was eager to buy me out of Circus Talents and take the equipment, so getting out of the business was easy. All right, so let me take you back a little bit here. If you remember, I had started Circus Talents Limited, which was an all-in-one production company with a guy named Jim Morris. Now, I met Jim through Peter Watts, my good friend who got me involved with Pink Floyd, and he was this incredible sound man. He had been their manager, and he was their sound engineer and whatever. At any rate, he was really good friends with these two guys, Jim Morris and Bill Kelsey, and the two of them had a really hot sound and lighting company called Kelsey Morris, which was really at the forefront of technology in the UK in the early 70s. Jim happened to live in the same building as Peter and Putty. Peter and Putty lived on one floor, and Jim and his girlfriend Judy lived above them. So when Kelsey Morris was getting ready to split up, and I had approached Peter on the idea of this all-in-one production company, he introduced me to Jim. And I became friendly with Jim, and when I would hang out at Peter's apartment, Jim would often be there anyway. So we became really friendly. We discussed the concept. He was taking the equipment that he had from Kelsey Morris. So we made a deal. We created Circus Talents Limited. Jim was my partner, and rock and roll. We went on the road, so to speak. Jim initially went on the road and did some small tours. Jim was good friends with a guy named Robert Stigwood, who was one of the premier managers back in the day. I remember on a Boxing Day, he wanted me to go to Stigwood's house, and I didn't go. How stupid was I? Because one of the things that Jim had told me from the very beginning is we could get the Bee Gees through Stigwood. We did, but it was just a little tiny tour. We also got a little Genesis tour, and as I told you, the first major tour we did was really Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which I pretty much did myself, because almost at the same time, shortly after that, we got Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Jim initially went out on that, and then I took over from Jim when ELP were finished, and I've told you about my experience on Dark Side of the Moon tour. After Dark Side of the Moon tour, Peter and I kept going. You know, Jim sort of stayed in the background. And I think in between he was doing little tours and stuff, which you'll hear about in a minute. But Peter and I had done so well with Dark Side of the Moon tour that he had spoken to Steve O'Rourke. And he went out looking for work because he wasn't going on the road again with Floyd for a while. And so we took that combined equipment and we did a mega 3-dog night T-Rex American tour. T-Rex didn't do many American tours. They were huge, huge in Europe. In the UK, they sold out Wembley. In America, very few people knew him. And putting him on the bill with 3-Dog Night, not a great idea at all. Because 3-Dog Night had a certain type of fan. And they were not glam rock fans, which is the kind of fans that Mark Bolan and T-Rex had. At any rate, it was an interesting tour for me, not so much for Mark Bolan, because people just didn't get him. And here he was, this huge guy, playing his hit songs, and people really didn't get it. 3-Dog Night, on the other hand, mega hit after hit after hit, and crazy, some crazy dudes, man. Danny Hutton, one of the craziest guys ever. He and I became kind of friendly, and when I was in L.A., he invited me to a party out at his house. I couldn't believe it. I went to his house. It was in the Hollywood Hills somewhere. Beautiful house with nothing in it. No furniture, nothing. He had like a bed, a pool table. I don't think he spent too much time there, but we had a great time. And I always enjoyed popping in on that tour to see Danny. Peter went on the whole tour. He was the sound guy for the tour. I didn't go on the whole tour, but it was a successful tour. And then the kidney stones and the hospital, that happened after that tour. So we were kind of in between, and I had it, and I was ready to give it all up. All right. So I had this epiphany, and I started crying, and I decided I'll go back to school, and I'll sell my business. Okay. Jim was eager. I decided then and there to go back to school to become a physician. And once I got out of the hospital, I put my plan into action. Jim was eager to buy me out of circus talents and take the equipment, so getting out of the business was easy. About a year later, I found out why Jim was so anxious to buy me out. I got a phone call from Stuart Young, who was still managing ELP, and he had an interesting story to tell me. Stuart had been visited by agents from Scotland Yard, questioning him about his relationship to Jim Morris. Unbeknownst to me, Jim had been using our speaker cabinets to smuggle large quantities of hashish from Europe into the U.S. Jim had been dealing with a man named Howard Marks. Now, you might recognize that name. Howard wrote a book. He spent a lot of time in jail, and then he wrote a book called Mr. Nice, and he went on the road a little bit and talked about the book. I think he's deceased now, but the book is around, so you can pick it up. So, again, Jim had been dealing with him, and Howard, who at the time was one of the largest hashish smugglers in the world. Every time Circus Talents did a tour for ELP or Pink Floyd or whomever, the speaker cabinets were packed with the hidden hash. Since the equipment was only temporarily in the U.S., assuming there were no problems with the paperwork, inspection of the equipment was minimal. After the tours were finished, Jim made sure the speaker cabinets were packed with bricks so that the weight of the cabinets when they left the U.S. would be the same as when they had arrived. I had no idea. I had no idea. Of course, I didn't travel with the equipment I would be traveling with the group. But Jim did travel with the equipment a lot, and I never quite understood why. But sorry about that. But he wanted to travel with the equipment for whatever reason, and now I know the reason. At any rate, unbelievable, right? Marx was eventually caught, convicted, and served 7 years. In his autobiography titled Mr. Nice, he tells the story of the first shipment using this scheme. It was in 1973, at a time when none of our groups were going on tour in the U.S. Jim was so sure of the plan that he got 4 out-of-work musicians to form a fictitious group called Laughing Grass. The group acted as if they had a tour booked in California beginning in L.A. Jim took our speaker cabinets out to a location in the remote French countryside where they were packed with a few hundred kilos of hash. They were then shipped from Paris through New York to L.A. without incident. Fortunately, neither Stewart nor I were implicated, and as far as I know, my ex-partner Jim, disappeared and was never prosecuted. Now, interestingly enough, and I didn't write about it in the book, after that, or actually I found out about Stewart later on. I found out about Stewart's little visit with Scotland Yard years later. But I also got visited. I didn't write about it in the book, but I was in a basement apartment in Hempstead going to Hofstra University to try and finish college. And I got a knock on the door, and it was 2 federal agents. And do you know Jim Morris? And blah, 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 blah. And, blah, blah, blah. And fortunately, they knew that I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't implicated. My father wasn't implicated. And they were just looking for Jim and wondered if I had information on it. So, unbelievable, right? You never know who your partners are. And that was Circus Talents. Okay. All right, that's it for today. We're going to start next week on my long road to becoming a doctor, which took me about 10 years, and you'll hear the story as the story goes along. Yeah, what else can I tell you? Join me on Facebook and Spotify and iHeartRadio, DST on Saturdays and Sundays. And I'll see you again next week for another episode of Rock Doc. All right. Have a great week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you real soon. Bye now.